Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Slip Safety Show. I'm Christian Harris and my guest today is James Tye of Hammersbach Consulting. James is an expert in how to handle insurance claims. He's done a lot of work over the years in the attritional claims world of the likes of slips, trips and falls, manual handling, etc. And he's worked with clients ranging from big multinationals to SMEs. So he's got a huge breadth of insight on this topic, and essentially he and his business exist to help clients such as you watching this or listening to this episode to reduce the cost that you incur when somebody makes a claim against you. There are two strategies for that which James is going to talk about. There's pre-event and post-event. So what can you do to improve your risk management beforehand to try to limit the chances of claims arising, and then after a claim has come about, what can you do then to keep the payout for that claim to an absolute bare minimum. James has got some great things to talk about and tips and hints to share. We also talk a bit about how to position and sell the benefits of proactive risk management within organisations, which I think would be of use for everybody watching this as well. Hope you enjoy this episode with James Tye, so let's get into it, and here we go. James Tye, welcome to the Slip Safety Show.
Thank you very much.
Do you want to start by giving us a bit of an overview as to who you are and what you do?
Okay, my name's James Tye. I'm the principal of Hammersbach Consulting. We're a claims management consulting business who provide claims cost control and process improvement advice to corporate organisations and claims handling businesses. We focus generally on pre and post loss claims handling solutions, sort of allowing and enabling organisations to control and reduce their cost of claims and overall improve their bottom lines. I've been a claims consultant. I've been in the claims industry now for almost 30 years. I've worked for some of the largest insurance brokers in the world, and in turn with a number of the largest FTSE 250 clients across a variety of industry sectors.
Okay, and I guess the fact that you have set up your own business is because you felt that there was a gap in the market that you could fill.
Yeah, I'd had a long time at my last company, and I was growing of the view that there were a number of businesses in the smaller, the SME market, who perhaps could benefit from sort of the services and the products that we could deliver, and were missing a trick slightly because they didn't have the access to the expertise and the networks that larger companies had. So I set up primarily with an initial focus to try and help support the SME businesses in managing their cost of claims and helping them improve their bottom lines. But over time, the business has grown to encompass some of the old corporate clients that I used to look after, and the net spread wider as the months have come by.
Start niche and then grow, pivot and grow from there. Business 101 or Startup 101.
Yeah, that's right.
I think the
opportunities when they come.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. I mean, the SME market, is an interesting one because typically they have a very threadbare team of safety and possibly not anybody that's particularly solely responsible for insurance and risk management. So there is, I see certainly a big need in that space. Whereas if you go to one of these kind of multinationals, they've got dozens of people in safety and several people in insurance and a few people in risk management and so on and so forth.
Yeah, that's right. And smaller and medium-sized companies, I think, can get a lot of value from our type of service because we're there to take a bit of a weight and a burden off of their desk. Often it's one person with a number of hats, and never enough time to devote the necessary time to each of those hats. So the more you can do to help and take that burden away, I think is appreciated and creates a value that they really appreciate.
Mm. And I suppose as well, if you are a, maybe not a small business, but a more of a medium-sized business, these claims costs can quickly go out of control. Whereas again, in a big multinational or a big supermarket, they get a hell of a lot of claims, but the kind of costs do sort of even themselves out across such a big network of stores, for example. Whereas if you've got a medium-sized business with 5 or 6 sites, whatever they're doing, and you have 2 or 3 big claims, that could put you into trouble.
Yeah, exactly. And I think in my experience, smaller or more medium-sized companies suffer just as much as the big companies. A loss is a loss, whether you're turning over billions of pounds a year or whether you're turning over hundreds of thousands or millions of pounds a year. And it's just as difficult to recover from, and it's just as important to control it. You're right, that smoothing isn't necessarily there. And also, as I said, that focus. I think it's a nice to have for many of these organisations rather than a need to have. And if I can help them with that's great. And I think there's a value to everyone. I'm a big believer that the problem or the solution that benefits a multinational is just as valid for a smaller business. So I wanted to try and take that to them and say, look, you don't have to be a multinational to get this kind of benefit. You've got the same issues. If anything, you've got a tighter control on your costs, and you've got more need to make sure that bottom line's there. And these businesses, I suppose, by design, by default, have been driven by the market a lot more. They're driven by their insurers, they're driven by the underwriters particularly. Whereas I wanted to try and help them actually take a bit of a lead and say, you know what, we want to have some more control as to how our premiums are written. We want to make sure we can tell that story. And that's something that the larger organisations quite rightly are very, very good at. But I think it's a trick that the medium-sized businesses have been missing. But there's no reason why they shouldn't sort of have that bite at the cherry too.
Yeah, I've heard an expression that when it comes to insurance, you're not actually buying insurance, you're selling risk, and flipping it on its head, as you've said. And actually, you're as the client, your job is to actually tell that story and present the evidence and the arguments and all this stuff to actually enable the market to understand what your risk really is or is likely to be, and therefore come to a more considered view on what your premium should be.
Yes, absolutely. And I think the claims plays a very big part of that, and claims cost control plays a very big part of that. So in conjunction with the broker, I think it's great to be able to help people tell that story and look to the future, not the past. People often talk about a claims experience, as something that you've had. Well, that doesn't mean it's necessarily what you're going to have. And if we can all help in my world, in your world, and other risk management worlds, if we can help tell the story of the future, then that's a positive for a business rather than relying on what's happened in the past.
Yeah. And are you seeing much difference in terms of the markets? Because it seems certainly on certain lines of business, it's been hardening over the last few months. Are you seeing that's affecting, the way people are approaching things, or the extent to which people are more interested in working with you and doing the sorts of things that you can offer?
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely seeing a hardening of the market in a number of areas, which is always going to impact on the client, and it's always going to impact on how they transfer that risk. But I think also what we're seeing is a change in the way or the ability for clients to handle claims. I work a lot with clients who do, to a greater or lesser extent, handle their own claims. They may use a TPA, they may use an outsourced loss adjuster or law firm to help them support to handle the claims. But that pool's shrinking also. And if you're a firm with quite a high volume of claims, especially attritional claims, the market for organisations that can handle that volume and have experience in your sector is shrinking. We're seeing a lot of mergers, a lot of takeovers, just as we are in the broking world. And that's something that the message I get from clients as a concern is that, is that choice is reducing. So we try to help them make the best decision. We try to help them create and manage a process that will benefit them and that they can take, that's transportable, that they own and can take to any claims handler, any insurer, any service provider, and sort of mitigate that risk of the lack of choice.
Yeah.
That's not to say there aren't other people out there. There are a great deal of smaller niche claims handling operations in the market that are absolutely great at what they do. But it can be a little bit of horses for courses, and they don't necessarily want to take on volume work, or they don't want to take on work in a certain line of business or a certain industry. So it's navigating that and helping our clients understand the right fit or the right fits for them.
Yeah.
That's what we're seeing as much as anything in the market. Before you even get to the point of the premium, the risk transfer and the capacity issues and the hardening of the market, it's that day one choice can also be a concern for them.
So which sectors do you then specialise in particularly?
So we try to cover all sectors, and certainly across the property and casualty classes of insurance. We've sort of over time gravitated to the retail sector and the transportation, particularly the passenger and freight transportation sectors. That, I guess, wasn't a defined strategy for us. It was just a way over the years that we have moved. Those two are industries where they're exposed to sort of both the volume, the high volume, low value, attritional type losses, and the more specific large losses, both of which have slightly different characteristics, have slightly different needs in the way of managing the claims costs, but are both equally as important in needing control and have an equally sort of large impact on the bottom line, or the potential impact on the bottom line of a business. So that's where it's taken us. Retailers, and when I say retail, it's not just supermarkets and things like that. It's anybody really with a high street presence, anybody with high footfall, a branch network. They are people who can really benefit from controlling the claims costs.
Yeah.
And I think we'll talk about that a little bit more in the context of slips and trips. These are the guys that can have costs sneak up on them, if you like, and suddenly, they're out of sight, out of mind. Of course, this happens all the time with X number of branches. And suddenly when you look at the numbers, you think, crikey, that's really adding up. Yeah. And that can get a little bit forgotten. Everybody seems to focus on the major loss. What happens if this burns down? What happens if that happens? Yeah. Because it's a huge number instantaneously. But people tend to forget about the creep and the cost savings that can be achieved there.
Yeah, I'd agree with you on that, both from a risk and insurance perspective and a health and safety perspective as well. When I go and speak with senior health and safety leaders in no matter what sector, it's fair to say, they would say to me that they're pretty much on top of their large catastrophic risk type safety issues, or they feel they are. Whereas it's these attritional things like the manual handling and the slips and trips and cuts in kitchens and things like that that are still going on and on and on. And yes, I think some of that is about a bit of perception issue. So certainly that's something that I've been battling against, is trying to make people understand that whilst these kinds of accidents are common, they shouldn't necessarily be common. There are things you can do about it, but they are important, and the impact of them, as you say, is massive.
Yeah, they're not sexy, to be frank. They're not cyber. They're not anything that people can hang their hat on and go, look at this great big new thing, cyber. And I use that as an example because it's everywhere. We've got these great solutions. There's costs here. There's potential exposure there, and that gets the name and that gets the focus. And the danger is that the very real costs the very real regular costs just get forgotten about.
Yeah.
And that's what I think, we're trying to help guys understand and to manage.
So we work quite closely with AXA, as I think you know, and they published some data about 18 months ago, and they said that slips, and it's slips, not slips, trips and falls, just slips. They were spending about £80 million a year on claims, and the next largest from a casualty perspective was manual handling with about 45 million. And then there's a fairly big drop from there. Would that sort of proportion be in line with what you've seen over the years in clients you've worked with?
Yeah, broadly so. I think, going back to what I just said, if you were to ask a client, the average client, how they felt about that as a number, I think you'd find that most of them would say, do you know what, I never really put two and two together to get to that. I've concentrated on the £4 million fire, or I've concentrated on the issues that possibly cause me more of a concern from a branding or from a PR point of view, those that are more high profile.
Yeah.
The slips, again, I think they're a cost. They can be controlled. The process can be managed, but they're easily forgotten. Bizarrely enough, it's a bit of an out of sight, out of mind approach, I think, with a lot of people. Because again, that focus is on what's big or what's going to land on the MD's desk, or what's going to land on the FD's desk, or hit the board. And it generally isn't those. And I think for us, it's about raising an awareness to say, look, you might not think about this, and you might just think that it's 2,000 here, it's 10,000 there. But start looking holistically, put it all together, and you're going to see a number that scares you, and you're going to see a number that you want to find solutions for.
Yeah. And of course, we have seen, as you know, a couple of quite high-profile criminal cases that have gone to trial. So there was one in a co-op in Truro where a gentleman died after slipping over, and that led to about a £400,000 fine. And there was one more recently for Tesco where a gentleman slipped over and broke his hip, and that led to a £733,000 fine. So I think that those kinds of criminal actions will start to get people to sit up and take perhaps a little bit more notice as well.
Absolutely, and while the incidents themselves or the results are tragic, I think it's important that they get the visibility to raise that awareness and put them back on people's radar. Because again, as you say, that the fines that can come from it, the corporate liability that can come from it, tends to get forgotten. We think about other things when we're looking at corporate manslaughter, when we're thinking about liability from a D&O perspective.
Yeah,
these things just don't get the press or don't get the visibility that they both need and deserve if people are going to effectively try and control them.
Yeah, one of the challenges that I see often is in the sort of bigger end of business is that if you think about the CEO and the CFO and how they're remunerated and what they're targeted on, it's all about the kind of short-term share price increase. And so some accidents like this, which yes, there are the volumes there, but the actual cost of them, there's quite a huge lag between when the incident occurs and when the costs start to be paid out. And then if there's going to be any criminal action, that's going to be a long period after that as well. So it's almost kind of kicking the can down the road, isn't it?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely spot on. And when we were talking about having this conversation, I'd made a few points that I was wanting to touch on, and cost versus reward was one of those exact things. If we're going to, for want of a better word, sell effective risk management and effective prevention and cost reduction, we've got to get a message across that the reward may be long term. These aren't necessarily quick fixes. And again, I hark back to the major incident. You can put something in place that will help you if you burn down tomorrow. That's great because it ticks everybody's box. I've done my BCP, I've done my risk register. Look, I've got a piece of paper that says if it happens tomorrow, we're fine. Nobody's thinking about what happens in 2, 3, 4, 5 years' time. And we need to raise the awareness with the risk managers and with the purse holders, more importantly, because the risk manager may get it, but if he needs sign off from an FD to invest some money in some training or in some prevention or in some cost control, he or she needs to be able to needs help selling that to the purse holder. And we need to get that message across that these aren't necessarily quick wins. But if you take a long-term view and you look at the numbers over a period of time, you're going to see that there's a benefit there. And eventually, the cost, the value will outweigh the cost. You've just got to give it a bit of time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's I always say it's a difficult sell, for want of a better term. I don't really like to think about selling what we do, but it's much easier to go somewhere and say, here's a tin of beans, and you're currently spending 99p, but here's something for 97p. It's much more difficult to go to somebody and say you're currently spending 98p on your beans, but if you spend £1.03 on your beans in 5 years' time, you'll make 20% extra margin for whatever reason. It's a bit more of a difficult thing to try and get across.
Yeah, and you're right, and I think that's primarily driven by, as you say, the short-term reward that a lot of people achieve or are remunerated by, and also just a lack of long-term thinking. Mm-hmm. I mean, many smaller or medium-sized businesses can be almost hand to mouth. They're looking to see how they're doing each year. Yeah. In terms of a profit, in terms of how they're going to survive, succeed, or ideally grow. If you ask them what the 5-year plan is, it may well simply be still be in business, not have been swallowed up, not have gone under, I'll have reduced slips costs here, or some of the smaller, more medium-sized businesses don't necessarily have the luxury of being able to plan over a longer period.
No, that's
doesn't
true.
mean they shouldn't. Doesn't mean we can't help them do that.
Yeah, of course, yeah. So, if from a sort of practical sense, I know that there's a lot to what you do, but what would be, say, a top 3 things that people could or should be starting to think about a bit more, or put a bit more rigor into to try and improve the management and the cost control of their claims?
I think there are a number of things that you can start to do, if you like, early in the process to try and get a grip of your claims costs. And firstly, that's to truly understand what they are. There are so many aspects to the cost of your claims, and it isn't just the amount that is paid out in damages, whether you're paying that yourself or whether that's your insurer that's paying it. There's enough there, for a client to look at it and say, I've paid out £10,000 on this, and that was made up of £8,000 in damages, and so on and so forth. But what's the true cost of that to you? And it's to try and understand what the true cost of that claim is to your business, in terms of the loss of working time, the brand, the reputation, the time spent by people within your business dealing with that claim, how much time your health and safety person has to spend, all the different elements. So the first step, I think, is to try and understand what these costs are, and to get to an understanding of that. The second is to be prepared to accept advice. Often I will come across organisations who, and I understand this, but immediately put barriers up. Yeah. Because there is a perception that you are trying to tell them how to run their business. We're not trying to tell you how to run your business. We're trying to help you control your costs. You know how to run your business better than I do, but I can help you with certain aspects of it if you're open to advice. Yeah. I'm not going to say don't do this, don't do that. That's counterproductive. So open up to a bit of advice. Don't immediately put the barriers up. Embrace the change, because reducing your costs, it could well mean some change in changing the way you do things, changing the way you look at things. So again, be open to that. The third or the fourth, I can't remember what number I was in there, but learn to understand your data. data is so powerful. We can help you with a lot of very, very practical and physical methods of reducing your claims costs in the way that you can do the same for the slips. But data is king in many, many ways. And if we're going to help you control the costs and tell the story and be the leader in your insurance and go to your brokers and your insurers with the story to tell and lead them the way you want to go, you need to have the data to support it and to understand it. And I think in many, many areas, organizations are too reliant on the data that they are given by other parties, by their insurer, by their law firm, by whomever, and they don't necessarily understand it. It may not be the data they need in the first place, and even if it is, they may not understand it. Understand your data. Know what the figures are telling you, because it will lead you in the right direction. Yeah, so understand the data. Learn to understand your data, and at that point, I think you're in a strong position to see where the potential is to get to a best practice and to become the best in class, and then we can help you get there. But I think you have to be open to that concept in the first instance, rather than accepting that, you know what, I pay a premium, I transfer that risk, I'm a transactional type of business, I can't or don't want any control. I would really encourage people to say, I can have some control because it can save me money.
Yeah. The data point's an interesting one for a couple of reasons. Firstly, I always find that it's much easier to get a prospect or a client to buy into some data if you can actually work with them and get them to make the calculations and come up with the data themselves. So rather than saying, look, X% of this happens and Y% of that happens and this costs Z, let's actually get them to sit down and work through their own data, which sometimes isn't perfect to start with, but at least to get an idea from that. And I think secondly, excuse me, I was going to just ask about some of the kind of blockers, and there's a data point about this. So clearly one of the blockers that you've identified or challenges is an attitude or an openness question from the client's perspective. But another one from my perspective, and you and I have spoken a bit about this before, but it's an interesting point, is around the data that you can actually get from insurers, because it you know, whenever I'm shown data as part of a case that AXA or one of the other partners we've got is pitching for, you know, can you have a look at this? What do you think? Where might their issues be? What could we propose to them as a potential proactive risk management solution? I tend to find that the data is very, very difficult to grapple with, and there's not much detail there.
Yeah, no, exactly. I think that the challenge that we have with that comes in a number of areas. Firstly, if we're talking about insurer data, I think we have to accept, to a degree, larger or smaller depending on the insurer, that it's not really being created to provide risk management or claims data. It's an accounting tool. It's there to understand the potential cost, monitor the spend, and look at what the profit was at the end of the day. It's not designed to drill down on a specific client level or specific causation level, truly. Those insurers who are getting cleverer and smarter and more effective at that, I don't think are still, and can be, because of the number of clients they have and the broad range of businesses that they insure, they can't be specific enough for a particular client, because data that's important to one client could very, very well be completely different to data that's important to another. They could both be the manufacturer of widgets. They could both have 6,000 incidents every quarter. But the reasons behind that and the data that would help you analyze that and come to some meaningful decisions behind that could be very, very different. So they're not built that way. They just aren't. And I'm a big advocate in controlling your own data, because the other issue, the other challenge that you have on that level is when you leave your carrier, who you have got to a point where perhaps you trust the data or you feel the data is useful, you've got to start again with a completely new carrier.
Yeah.
And if you are the type of client that moves every year because you want to save £1, or if you're the client that needs to move quite regularly because your insurers have bought in business and want to increase your premium significantly, you're constantly on the back foot. So the more you can own in terms of your data, your claims process, and the control that you have, the more that you can own and take with you wherever you go, the better it's got to be for you, because you're not beholden to anybody.
Yeah.
You create something that's good for you and you take it with you. And that's a barrier that I think that people still struggle to overcome.
Are there clients that are that sophisticated yet, or is that still something that's in its infancy and will increase over time?
I think clients are becoming much more alive to that now. They like the idea, especially when times are tough or when margins are small. I think clients are really awakening to the idea that they need to be telling that story and they need to have some ownership, especially if it's their money, directly their money from a retention or a captive or whatever. Especially when it's their money, I think they're much more alive to that ownership. I'm not certain that everybody quite understands how to do it and what the best way of doing it is, and that's where there's an education. I'm going back to being open to some new ideas, because there are some innovative ways of being able to do it. A lot of people will, a lot of clients might think, well, I only have £1,000 deductible, or I only have a £5,000 deductible. Most of my risks transferred. I can't own anything. I'm reliant on the insurer. Well, that's not necessarily so. And there are ways you can deal with that. So I think, yes, they are becoming more alive to it. It's getting better as well. And I do find that insurers are also accepting of it. They understand. If you ask if you ask the right people and you have the real conversations, I think most underwriters and certainly claims people will say, yeah, you know what, we can't do what you want. We can't do what you need. And we are open as an insurer to you taking some control or ownership of that, as long as you're engaging and as long as we feel we're on board. So it's a two-way street, but it's a two-way street where I think both parties, I don't want that to sound like we are just knocking the carriers. They're open to it too. And I think they are generally engaged enough to accept that between you can come to a solution. So that is a barrier, but it's a barrier that I think is quite an easy one to overcome.
Yeah. I mean, it's easy to knock the insurers, isn't it? But equally, they are big, massive companies, and
exactly,
it takes time to turn the Titanic away from an iceberg, and it takes time to get these big companies to adapt and change. But I certainly feel as if there's a greater emphasis on risk management now than there ever has been, certainly in my time in this world of sort of 10 odd years. So that must be a positive thing, and clearly getting the right data and enabling you to understand which risks you actually need to manage and how to do it best is going to be a critical part of that.
It is. You're right, and it's difficult for insurers because, as I say, they've got so many clients across so many different tranches of business that even if they wanted to, it's not practical for them to be bespoke at the level we need them to be. So the only way to do that is to take ownership yourself. And you as a client can do that. It doesn't have to be cost prohibitive. There may well be a cost, and that's another challenge that you as the risk manager or whomever have got to be able to articulate within your business. Going back to that, saving money might cost a bit of money in the first instance. But the challenge there is for the risk manager, the insurance manager, or whomever, even the health and safety, the manager, because he or she may have that responsibility in a smaller organisation. If you can articulate that benefit to your chief exec, then you're halfway there, because that's broadly where we see the buck stop most of the time. You can come up with a brilliant plan, a great idea, and it gets to the purse holder, and then it's just a no, because you know what, I need new floodlights in the car park, or we need to pay dividends this year, or in some cases I've got a golfing holiday to go on, or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's trying to get that message across that there's value here, and it's a slightly different approach.
And that's why it's important to get the insurer involved, because actually there's all sorts of creative ways that they can help to part fund that kind of improved activity, whether it's a bursary or a premium rebate, or or any other number of things. And so I think having that holistic approach and getting all of the stakeholders together, and it has to be the way forward.
It does, and you touch on a great topic there, bursaries. There are bursaries out there, for want of a better word. There is money available in many, many cases, sometimes well publicized, sometimes not well publicized. And I would always advocate for a client to say to their broker, is there money available? Can this be a cost neutral exercise for me? Will somebody partner with me in doing it? And if the answer is yes, excellent. And my advice to the client then is to make sure you keep control of that spend, and spend it on what you, under advice, think is the best way to spend it, rather than allowing your insurer to say, we will give you this money as long as you do X with it. Because that might not necessarily benefit you in the way you need it to. It might benefit the insurer, because ultimately all it means is the insurer makes more profit. Well, that's not necessarily your end game as the client, is to make your insurer profit. It's to make sure that your business is protected and that you are achieving a saving. So keep control of your bursary is something.
It's an interesting.
They can help with that.
It's interesting. I can think of an example, a live example. It can't be too specific, but it's an insurer that we work with, and there's fairly significant bursary over a 3-year term, and the client wants to spend the bursary on some software they've developed to themselves to kind of track health and safety incidents and things like that. So there is a value there. But it's more of it won't necessarily help them to stop a claim. It's going to be tracking what's happening, whereas the insurer is quite keen to do some more proactive stuff, because actually looking down the history, won't be surprised to hear, because I'm involved in it, that it's people slipping over that's their biggest by far and away their biggest cost. And so they're kind of saying, well, look, we want to try and do something with Christian and his team, because we think that there's going to be more immediate value from that. So it's a difficult balancing act.
It is, and it as we just said, it touches on a collegiate approach. It touches on the need for everybody to be open to advice. You're right. I've had similar cases where the proposal that we've put forward for the use of the bursary has been, in our opinion and the broker's opinion, blatantly obvious as to why this is exactly the right thing to do to reduce these claims, to reduce these volumes, to reduce these costs. And the client went, and I just said, well, but I want floodlights in my car park. Well, floodlights in your car park aren't going to help where your losses are.
No.
Yeah, but if the insurer is going to buy me something, they're going to buy me some floodlights.
Yeah.
And that's the wrong approach. They're not going to buy you something. It's not Christmas. It's not asking your, putting your wish list down. It's an investment. But it swings both ways. And I think both client and insurer have to accept that they need to talk, and that there's a middle ground. But you're right, bursaries, that's a great example of just thinking a little bit differently and saying, hang on, this doesn't have to be an immediate cost to me. There are ways that this can be funded or managed, or the program can be structured in a way. There are lots of ways that these improvements and these benefits that we can all bring can be achieved without having to be an excessive cost.
Yeah.
On the flip side, sometimes, Mr. Client, you've just got to pay, and that's sometimes a strong message that we have to try and get across.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's and when you're thinking about certainly multi-site operators and just on slips, never mind anything else, 10 grand here, 5 grand there, 20 grand here, 2 grand there, it all adds up quite quickly. So actually the solutions and the ways of mitigating that risk are very, very much smaller than the costs that are being paid out, albeit that, of course, there's some element of excess and deductible that's going to come into play. So a lot of what we've spoken about is about understanding, I suppose, and actually clients understanding what they should be thinking about or what they should be doing. And that kind of gets us into this whole world, which again, you and I have spoken about before, but I think is an interesting point to bring out about how do you sell the benefits of risk management. So I just wondered if you'd got any good strategies or ideas or success stories that you've used before in terms of how you pitch that within an organization to kind of get that buy-in and move things forward.
Yeah, I think we've touched on a couple already, and I'll quite happily just go over them again. And you hit on one as well. The data aspect is an important one, and you touched on it when you said sometimes getting the client to do the workings out themselves. Here's what it is. I mean, it's very easy for me to take your information, run through all the work and say, that's costing you this, this is why. For the client to say, well, you would say that, wouldn't you? Because you want me to spend some money with you. And you go, yeah, I can understand why you take that approach, but you're quite right. If you can lead the client to that point and say, look, together we have gone through this and I've helped you understand why you've had the light bulb moment of, this is a big cost that I need to control. That's a key point. It's helping that client make the decision or get to the understanding themselves. You're very right there. The second one for me is, as we just touched on, is getting the business on board. If you can help your contact, your risk manager, your health and safety manager, if you can help them articulate, because we're not going to use the word sell, but articulate the benefits or the value up their management line, and it helps them sell, I'm using the word, if it helps them sell the story and the benefits to the purse holders, and if we're being brutally honest, because people are people, helps them all look good and tick their boxes for their appraisals and helps them, because when we look at other ways that we help clients in terms of large loss planning or loss scenario testing, the question we ask is basically what keeps you awake, or what's the worst thing that you could think that could happen, and then I'll tell you what it really is. But you want to be in a position where you can go to your chief exec and say, I've covered every base, I've ticked every box. We talked earlier saying that's not necessarily how it works with attritional losses. But there are occasions where you want to be able to say to your management, I have looked at every way that we can save money. We are your claims department, we are your health and safety department, and you can rest assured that we are controlling the costs, spending as little as possible. So if there are savings to be made in the business, well, perhaps it's in a different area, because from insurance and claims, we're doing the most we can to save, and we're spending as little as possible. If you can help them do that and help them tell that story, I think that helps you as the advisor to get that engagement, because everybody wins, both at a financial and at a personal level there. So you get a lot of buy-in. And I guess thirdly is back to what we said earlier, is articulating the fact that cost and reward may be long-term. And as soon as you can get that acknowledgement or that acceptance, I think you're starting in the right place. Because quick wins, in my experience, tend to be short-lived wins. You can do some which are great. There's some obvious ones. My water bill's too high, we'll turn your heating down. That kind of thing is a quick, short win. But in the claims cost control environment, quick wins tend to be short-lived, because it's an initiative that you implement that soon gets forgotten, or the dynamics of your business are so fluid that something you put in place now is redundant in 6 months. So trying to get everybody to look at a bigger picture, It's good for them. It's good for you, because you want to be, as the advisor, as a service provider, you want to be engaged on the long term. You want a relationship. You want to be seen as part of that business, because you want to help them over the long term. You don't want to be seen as the person that comes in, fixes something, and goes away. When do I see so-and-so? Oh, I only see them every year when they want their fee. Well, that's not the way you want to be certainly that's not the way I want to be. That's not also our business operates. We want to be there long term. We don't need to be doing everything. We don't need to be doing something all the time, but we're there in the background. So getting your client to understand and buy into this concept that the cost versus the reward can be a long-term thing, I think it's also a really important way of getting the risk management element or the claims cost control element into people's minds and helping, for want of a better word, sell it.
Yeah. What about, I was trying to lead you down a certain path, but I'll be a bit more explicit, because an interesting conversation that we had was about how to frame the cost and the return on investment by using the client's product or service, or sort of putting it across in such a way. So tell us, because you had a good story about that. So.
Yeah, it's funny, because you talk about that, and I think for you and I, it's almost such a natural thing that we do now that you forget to talk about it, because you do it all the time. And it's about making that cost relevant. You can sit in front of a client and say that these costs, these claims are costing you X number of pounds over a year, and the FD will look at you and go, okay, I get that, because I'm a pound, shilling and pence guy, or I'm a dollar girl, or whatever. But when you get it a little bit further into the structure of a business, or when you get to speak to people who don't look at it just like that, sometimes there's no relevance. You need to be doing X, Y, and Z, Mr. Klein, because it's costing you A, B, and C. That means nothing. I've had clients in the past, as you have, who really just don't get the financial element. But if you make the cost relatable to their product, be it a cheese sandwich if they make cheese sandwiches, be it a soft drink if they make soft drinks, suddenly there's a light bulb moment, and you say, every slip that you have in your factory is going to, at a minimum, cost X number of cases of soft drink, which because it's ingrained within your business that a case of soft drinks has a net value of, let's say, £20, with a profit margin of a further £20. When you say to people, each slip will cost you 5,000 cases of soft drink, suddenly people go, crikey, that's a lot, because I work really hard to produce those cases of soft drinks, or it takes me ages to butter those sandwiches, or those flights that I pilot, schedule, whatever, and I know that we only make 3% per seat on. It gives it a relevance, and it gives it a context which suddenly engages people. And I think that's probably hopefully that's what you're driving at. We do that, you and I and others, we do that quite regularly, because we know what switches people on. But yes, that's a really, really important way of getting a consensus and getting a buy-in.
It's particularly powerful, I find, as well, in businesses that aren't very high margin. So somebody like a cleaning business that might be struggling to make anywhere near 10% margin. If you say, well, look, you need to sell a £250,000 a year contract to cover the cost of one manual handling accident or one slip or whatever, it's like, oh wow. So you can actually quite rapidly take that in and think, oh, that's a hell of a lot of work to sell that and deliver it, and we've got boots on the ground and costs of this and cost of that, and we may as well not have bothered if we have just one accident, and that does seem to bring it home a bit more.
It does, and I think when we are talking to wider groups from various different industries, if we fortunate enough to get everybody in the same place or on the same connection as we do now, I think it's amazing, but not unexpected, I suppose, that people really don't understand margins for other people. I think if you said to a hotelier, do you realise that a caterer only makes whatever percent on the sandwiches, or a soft drinks manufacturer, or to pick whatever industry you want. People go, crikey, I didn't realise the margins were that low. And in some cases, they might say, God, I didn't realise the margins were that big.
Well, that big, yeah. Well, I would take that a step further, actually. And I think a lot of people don't even think about margins at all. So, people will, you see so much, even in the media, talking about Premier League football clubs, for example, or they make so much money, but they all make a loss. It's like, it doesn't matter how much you turn over. It's actually, what do you get at the bottom that really matters?
Yeah. There's often a very great misconception between profit and revenue, and if in the context of the media, all you seem to hear when people talk about numbers is revenue. XYZ supermarket with a turnover of A, B, and C billion. What they're not telling you on that news item is, out of that, as you say, the profit's 3% or whatever. So to take that to its next level, the claimant, whom we've not touched on in any of this conversation, the person that's causing all the problems for our client, the claimant sees those numbers and thinks, if I slip over here, it's Christmas. Because they can afford it. They've got deep pockets. They're a big company, be that nationally, globally, or locally. We come across, we started this by talking about SMEs, or medium-sized businesses. There are medium-sized businesses in your county, in your region, in your area, that have a reputation because it's young business person done well, and they're seen as a target because all people see are those headline figures. XYZ local business person's done well and has now turned over 7 million. Well, next time I go to that person's petrol station, I'm going to have a birthday, or take it to the nationals and the multinationals. Those figures aren't true figures, but claimants don't see that or choose not to see that. And that's another message that we need to help people get to an understanding of, and we need to protect our clients from. Is the concept that because the numbers quoted are huge, then it's a license to slip over, or it's a license to go for these people. Sometimes people say to me, "What's the biggest advice you could tell a transport company to reduce their claims costs?" And the answer would be, "Don't put your name on the truck." And they go, "I can't do that because that's my advertising." Yes, it is, but it's also a big thing that says, "I was hit by an XYZ lorry." Which one was it? I don't know, but it had XYZ written on the side. And immediately that claim's come in, and the client goes, "Don't know, I'm gonna have to pay it." And you sometimes your best marketing is your worst invitation in things like that. And so throwing big numbers around in terms of profits in the media or revenue in the media, I think is also a very dangerous thing that clients need to can't avoid, but need to be aware that there are other consequences too.
No, absolutely. Conscious of time, James, but you said you've made a few more notes. So is there anything that was particularly pressing that we haven't touched on? Or?
No, I think we covered them. I wanted to just reiterate from my perspective from the claims cost control perspective, when we talk about slips, go back to what we were saying. I think these are forgotten costs, and they're a forgotten problem sometimes because they're not seen as sexy, they're not seen as glamorous, they're not high profile like other claims can be, but they're still a cost. They still can be controlled. They can be reduced. They can be eliminated. Not always, but key to all of it is to have a good process. And that's a good process from your side, but also a good process from mine for clients to say, you know what, the best way you manage your costs once an incident has occurred, if you cannot prevent it, once it's occurred, the best way to minimize the cost of those claims is to have a good process, is to have the right systems, the right people, and the right processes in place that minimize the cost to you. So there's no way around it. But it's about the process. Other than that, I think we've really covered everything I wanted to talk about.
Good.
And that was really interesting. Thank you.
Good. Well, before we go then, thanks very much for giving us some insights. I think there's a lot of value there that people can take. And if people, as a result of that, want to get in touch with you and have a chat and understand a bit more about how you could help them, what's the best ways of finding out more information and getting in touch with you?
So we have a website, which is hammersbachconsulting.co.uk. Really long word, hammersbachconsulting.co.uk. Have a look on there. You can find me on LinkedIn, and I'm sure we'll sort something out with links on
Yes, we'll do that. Yeah,
pages
don't
or
worry.
whatever. But yeah, Hammersbach, HAMMERSBACH consulting.co.uk.
Very good. And once the world is back to normal again, or as normal as it's going to be, we'll be, I suspect, out and about doing some. I don't want to call it a roadshow, but a series of events that we're working together on with some other people out there, sort of talking about slips, trips, and falls, and what you can do from an end-to-end perspective, understand, prevent, mitigate losses, defend claims, etc. So
absolutely.
we'll, as and when we can start talking about that more, we'll certainly do so.
James,
great. Well,
great stuff.
Thank you very much for your time, and we will talk to you again sometime soon, no doubt. Thanks.
Absolutely, no problem. Pleasure. Cheerio.